Carlos Nelson with Cascade Sports, and today we have our illustrious guest and my personal friend, Mr. Bob Kendricks, out of the Negro Baseball League Museum. And Bob, welcome to the show.
Carlos, it's great to be back, man. Good to see you. Happy New Year. All that good stuff.
Yeah. Hey, Bob, I want you to talk about the new commemorative coin that the Negro League has debuted, and what are the implications for the Negro League if this coin can be received by the public in a substantial way?
Well, I tell you what, to get the coin itself, and I couldn't be more prouder of the fact that this museum that operates here at historic 18th and Vine has been able to partner with the U.S. Mint to have the first ever U.S. Mint commemorative coins dedicated to the Negro Leagues released. And Carlos, these are not easy to get. The Mint only does 2 of these a year, and they're highly competitive. And there were a number of great institutions vying for the opportunity to get this coin. And we beat out a number of significant institutions. So, there's a level of prestige that goes along with this. It requires over 3/4 of Congress to sign off on the legislation to get the bill enacted. And as you well know, there's not a whole lot of bipartisanship going on in DC these days. And then you think about this, because we were able to get this passed in 2020. This was in the midst of a highly contentious presidential election year. So the Republicans and the Democrats didn't really agree on anything. So if one went out and said the sun is shining, the other gonna say, no, it ain't. But we were so fortunate, man, because we were able to get tremendous bipartisan leadership led by, of course, our Congressman, U.S. Congressman Emanuel Cleaver II. He got his colleague, Republican Congressman Steve Stivers out of Ohio. We were able to get U.S. Senator Roy Blunt, Republican, and Democratic Senator Tim Kaine, Virginia, although Tim Kaine is an honorary Kansas Citizen. He grew up here in Kansas City, went to Rockhurst High School. They led this effort to build a consensus necessary to get the passage of this legislation. The president signed it into law in December of 2020. I spent the entire year of 2021 working with the Mint and their team of artists to create the designs that we now see on these coins. And then just a couple of weeks ago, the coins became available for the public to buy. And you talked about the ramifications of the success of this program. Along with the prestige, there is real financial ramification, because if we're able to sell through the full allotment of these coins as allowable by the legislation, man, we could generate some $6 million from surcharges from that coin to come back to the museum. $6 million for our museum, Carlos, is a game changer. Yeah, it's a game changer. But even more so, what it does now is it allows me to leverage those resources for potential matching funds. So my goal would be to turn that 6 million into 12 million and really start the process of securing the long-term future of our museum. You and I have talked about this in the past. Most cultural institutions, particularly the size of ours, they are never funded properly. We're always clawing and scratching to have the necessary funds to operate and do the things that a museum like ours needs to do. We're trying to change that narrative. And so we started the museum in such a non-traditional fashion. There was no seed money. We like to say that we were able to do this with a hope and a prayer. Most museums already have an endowment in place. And we did this in as non-traditional fashion as you could ever imagine. But now it is time to make sure that this museum operates in perpetuity. So my goal, and I don't know how much longer I'm going to do this, but for me now that we've stabilized this organization to a great extent financially, from the time that I came back, now almost 11 years ago, the museum is pretty stable financially. Now it's time to grow it and put it in a position where whoever comes after me, they won't have to work nearly as hard as I did, but I hope they don't mess it up. So all that they have to do is not mess it up.
There's nobody like you. Let me cut you off on all of this crap. I've been here since '78. I watched not when things first started, because I was having this conversation last night with somebody about Eddie Baker and that jazz museum and a travesty that I see. And I watched the best. I get the old boys that I forgot his name, was the Empire.
Bob Motley, Don Motley.
I give them their props for their time.
Exactly.
They turned some soil to get this going. But Bob, there's nobody like you. And I'm not the suck up king. I wouldn't be sucking up to you. But the director before you, I knew him really well and what have you. I told you, I talked to two. They couldn't hold a candle to where you're at. And I still bring this scab up. I don't even know how you came back to the Negro League Museum after the way they did you.
Yeah. And I think about that from time to time. And Carlos, we've talked about it before. It was one of the most difficult decisions I ever had to make regarding coming back. And of course, this is public information. I missed by one vote from getting the job, and a number of years ago. And after I had moved on and started the next phase of my life, but I found it interesting. When I was leaving, everybody kept saying, "Oh, you'll be back, you'll be back," and I'm saying to myself, that's really nice, but that chapter is closed now. I'm moving on. Apparently, they knew something that I didn't know, because 13 months later, here I come back. And it wasn't an easy decision because, as you know, you're not supposed to make these kinds of decisions with your heart. You're supposed to make these decisions. They're supposed to be well thought out decisions. They're supposed to be done with your head. But if I tell you anything other than the fact that I made this decision to come back, almost 11 years ago, with anything other than my heart, I'd be lying to you. Because the more I tried to be rational, I'm trying to talk myself out of it. Every time I tried to talk myself into coming back, I started talking myself out why this ain't a good idea.
I don't think it was you. I think Buck was talking to your butt.
And there you have it. The more I tried to be rational, Buck was on the other shoulder saying, "Come on back home."
And right, come home. That's the thing.
Come home.
Not come rent. Come home.
Come home. And I think at some point I felt compelled that I needed to do whatever I possibly could, even at the risk of failing, because it wasn't as much about the ego side of being passed over. It was more about the fear of failing, because as you know, people never remember the guy that messed it up. They remember the guy that was there when the ship sank. When President Obama inherited one of the worst economic situations in this country's history, the minute President Bush turned the keys over to him, and nobody started talking about President Bush. They're like, "Okay, brother, what you gonna do?" And I knew that was going to be the way that people were going to look at this situation. But through it all, I just I can't sit on the sideline and watch a place that I had given so much of my heart and soul to, and knowing how much my friend Buck O'Neill put into this organization, and watch it fall by the wayside. So I had to do this for me, and I had to do it for Buck, and I had to do it for these amazing people that I work with every day, even if it meant the possibility of failing and having whatever legacy I might have had tarnished by the ability that maybe he
Well,
couldn't get it done.
hey, I told you, don't nobody like me because I be telling the truth. That damn jazz museum could use one of you over there. I'm serious because they, to me, they're in the same situation that you were in 11 years ago, but they've been in this situation a long time. And finding the right person to represent. And you was a shoe-in for what you do. And as I told you previously, I thought you should be out in Hollywood, but you love what you do, and it's not work. It's work, but it's not work.
But it's not. It's not, Carlos. And I always think about something that the late great Buck O'Neill said to me. He said, if you find a job that you love, you never work a day in your life. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is always going to go your way. You know, in my world, I'm asking people for their resources. I'm asking them for their money. And you're going to get told no. Everything ain't always going to go your way. But when you walk into this space every single day, you understand why you do what you do and why it is so important. And that if we do it right, we will leave something that will stand the test of time. So now this is about legacy. Yeah, this is about legacy. You know, we all want to make a great living. We want to make as much money. We want to have as much stuff as we can accumulate and make it as comfortable for our families as we can. But I do think that all of us who work here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum understand that this museum is bigger than we are, and that we have a chance collectively to leave something that will stand the test of time. So, you know, for me, what motivates me every single day, I've got a nearly 11-year-old granddaughter. One day she's going to bring her kids by this museum and say, you know what? Your great grandfather had something to do with this place. That's what motivates me now. And so to secure the long-term future of this museum is really now where the focal point is. And if we're successful in selling these coins, and the coins are magnificent. We've got a gold, silver, and what they call clad. It's a copper coin. And they actually are real currency. So, you know, if you were to buy the coin, you could actually.
What does the collector series cost if you got all the coins?
Yeah, now the cost of gold is sky high. Now, I'll be honest, when I saw the gold coin, I had some sticker shock. But the gold coin right now is selling for like $674. It's a $5 coin though. So if you were to go to the store, you could actually spend it for $5, but the collectors are never going to do that. And then the silver coin is selling for like 74, and the clad coin 35, something like that. And but these things are collectible.
You gotta have one of them if you're a baseball enthusiast. What I'm looking at, Bob, I don't know. I'd just be tripping. I was like, what you doing? You have the National Baseball Hall of Fame, but I told you I was looking at some stuff on Ruth and them. Yeah. I feel, and I know you would never say this, the Negro Baseball League Museum is the house that Bob Kendrick built. They were talking about Yankee Stadium, and I grew up right basically across the street from Yankee Stadium, the house that Ruth built.
Yeah.
That Negro League, I don't care what nobody say. You built that Negro. Not that these other people didn't have a part in it, but this thing would have petered out, and you'd have been. When I say you, they would have been on the titty at the city, and every year it's a problem with, can we keep our doors open?
Yeah, no, man. You know, for me, Carlos, it's an honor to have stepped in the enormous shoes of Buck O'Neill and tried to continue what he had done when he started this museum way back in 1990 and was our fearless leader for 16 years before he passed away in 2006. And to be able to step into his enormous shoes, I think some folks would feel the weight of his shadow looming over them. For me, I don't see it that way. His shadow protects me. Yeah, it protects me. Buck has been guiding my footsteps, I think, every step of the way since I got back. Because I can tell you now, man, I ain't that smart. And so some of this crazy stuff that I come up with, it just seems to
Tell me
work.
this: in your personality, you know how I'm confrontational and all of that type of stuff. Has How did Bucks? Because that's crap done rubbed up on me to a degree, dealing with disappointment
Yeah,
and all of that. Because I be trying to chill out, talking to you and hearing these stories, and then when I look at Buck on PBS, different things that where he's talking almost in a Martin Luther King
very much.
uh, fashion. Hey,
Very
they
much.
did me wrong. They crucified me, all of that, but leave all of that alone. We're not going to deal with that. We're going to deal with this positive thing. This is what we're doing.
And that was him. That was him. He was the, as I like to say, Carlos, he was the consummate glass half full. Some people see the glass half empty.
That's me.
Buck saw it half full. So some of the other Negro leaguers would lament the long bus rides that they faced. Well, Buck would say, "Hey man, I got to see the countryside." So his disposition was always coming from a place of positivity. Now, that doesn't mean that he accepted or liked the things that others had tried to perpetrate against them, but he was never going to succumb to that. He seemingly had the wherewithal to rise above the bitterness and the anger and the hate. I think he kind of subscribed to the old proverb that you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. And so but that was who he was. There's no question about that. There was nothing fake or
Fake or fabricated about that.
No, no.
Hold it, because I'm always looking for that when, like free lunch. Is this free? Nah, let's look at the small print. And I watched him. And when he didn't make that Hall of Fame, I couldn't have took it like that. Because I think I was watching that on PBS. There ain't no way I could have took that.
I would like to think that I could, but I know I couldn't. I know I couldn't. And that's why I tell people all the time, I am trying to be more Buck-like. I'm not there yet. I'm still a work in progress. And that day that I had to tell him that he didn't make it, man, it was devastating. We right adjacent to my office, the little conference room right behind my office. You've been in that room. I had to walk in that room and tell Buck that he didn't get enough votes to get in. And I didn't know how I was going to tell him. And the strength that he demonstrated that day, and don't get it misconstrued, he was hurt. He was hurt. The Hall of Fame represents the pinnacle, as you well know, for any athlete. So yes, he wanted to be there, but he wasn't going to be so sullen that he couldn't be genuinely joyous for those who had gotten their place in the Hall of Fame. But the strength that he demonstrated that day, and then to go to Cooperstown and speak on behalf of those who had gotten in when the world was saying, this should be your Hall of Fame induction speech, it's almost incomprehensible to me. And it may have been his finest hour. And which is interesting in its own right, that his finest hour came in defeat, but how he handled the defeat. So now we go back to December 5th of last year, when we all gathered here to await the news to see if Buck was at long last going to get in the Hall of Fame. Man, I am a nervous wreck. I had actually contemplated not doing a watch party because it had been so painful in 2006 that I'm like, I don't know, Bob, if you really want to put yourself through that again. And at the
questions and everything, if you don't make it.
And then at the 13th hour, I came to my senses because what I realized, Carlos, was that this was history in the making. Even if the verdict didn't go our way, we needed to capture this moment, and this moment needed to be shared with those who are friends, fans, and supporters of this museum. So we decided to do the watch party, and we all gathered here There's nearly 300 people who had gathered here waiting on the announcement. And when Josh Rawitz, who is the president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame, started to read the bio, we instantly knew it was Buck. And the room just erupted. And for me, man, I felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. And I could finally exhale. And then at that point, I became overcome with emotion. Because now I'm going back to 15 years ago, and you wish your friend was here to be able to celebrate.
You know what just popped in my mind, Bob, as you're telling that story? Bob probably said, "Pops, we here. We
here.
Crossed the finish line."
Yeah, no, because in 2006, they were tears of anguish. We're upset, we're mad, we're angry. All of us were, except for Buck. But in last year in December, they were tears of joy. Because he had finally gotten to take his place, his rightful place amongst the immortals of this game. And basically it completes his legacy in this game. Now, Buck understood that he didn't need the Hall of Fame to define him. He was a very self-assured Black man. So he knew he didn't need the Hall of Fame to define him. But this does complete his baseball life. And that's something that makes me proud. Although, again, 15 years later, man, I honestly, I didn't even think it ever was going to happen.
Well, I wanna dive into that Hall of Fame, and I want to talk about Barry Bonds a little bit, and some of the other find out what your feeling is on some of the other stars in the game, Roger
Clemens.
Yeah, and not making it. How do you feel about that?
I was tremendously disappointed that Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens in particular didn't get in. And I know people have these very strong moral views about a game that has this perception of being pristine, the sanctity of baseball. Man, as we know, there is...
Ain't none of these sports are pristine.
No, they're not. They're not. We fall in love with the romanticism of baseball. But that Hall of Fame, as we both know, have some scoundrels in there. I mean, they were mean, nasty people, but they could play baseball. They could play baseball, and that's how they were measured. You've got racists, you've got those who were womenizers, you've got a little bit of everything in there, but they were measured by how they played the game. Now, who knew that science would play such a prevalent role? Because in my mind, cheating is cheating. I don't care how you cheated. If you cheated, you cheated.
It could be equipment.
If I doctored the ball up,
yeah, right.
If I doctored the ball up, does that not give me an advantage over the guy at the plate? Of course it does. And so, okay, if those writers wanted to punish Barry and Roger, which it certainly seems like they were attempting to do. Okay, you did.
They did, because I think Barry's going through what Buck went through to a degree, and that bothers me.
Barry Bonds is one of the greatest baseball players this sport has ever seen. Buck O'Neil believed that he was one of the top 5 hitters in the history of this sport. In the history of this game. He had great admiration for Barry. And Carlos, I'll never forget this. We were traveling, and a reporter comes up to Buck, and I think he was trying to get him to say something disparaging about Barry, which Buck was never going to do. He absolutely loved Barry. And the reporter comes up to him and says, "Mr. O'Neil, what do you think about steroids?" And Buck looked at him, he says, "Son, the only reason we didn't use steroids, we didn't have steroids."
Right. I'm saying he was honest.
And it wasn't that he was condoning their use, but what he was trying to help the young man understand is, I cannot be so high and mighty and tell you what I would or wouldn't do when I ain't faced with that set of circumstances.
How do you feel about that? I'm saying, still think that steroids and all of that, that's bad. But it's just like you've overtrained. And I'm saying, talking about the power and no, you gotta have a skill set. I can be on all kinds of steroids I want to be. And the hardest thing in sports is hitting a damn baseball. All sports. Steroids don't make your eyesight hit that ball. And so,
you know, I go back and I think about the evolution of steroids and how I think baseball made its first calculated mistake by labeling them as performance enhancement. Wrong term. Because once you label it as a performance enhancement, you ain't gonna be able to manage that now. Because somebody always, you know, as an athlete, you're always looking for that edge. What can get me over the hump? You know, so now if I'm a young athlete and I'm hearing, that's all I'm hearing, performance enhancement. You know, kids think they're bulletproof anyway. So in many ways, I think it encouraged the use as opposed to discouraging the use.
It really ramped up with, when you say kids, I remember when all this stuff was coming out, them high school kids start, I can't let them get the jump on me.
Exactly. You know, we should have been talking all along about the detriment, the damage that these could potentially do, as opposed to labeling them as performance enhancement. But, you know, if you ask me, for my honest opinion, Barry Bonds is a first ballot Hall of Famer. He was that good before we ever knew anything about steroids. Roger Clemens, another guy that Buck had great admiration. I've had the great pleasure of walking them both through the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. If I had a Hall of Fame, they're both in there, you know, and it's so, and I was, I guess, pleased to see that there was so many others who have started to come to the same conclusion that the baseball writers really kind of messed that up.
To me, they're different ones have bones to pick. It's almost like making America great again. And I'm hold it. Like I said, don't nobody like me. I don't care. But I gotta give it to you from a layman's point of view. You know, there's no more Donna Reed and Father Knows Best and all of that. Those days, and if you try to put society and how we move forward in those terms, we'll always be back there. And I think these drugs and enhancement of performance, that's part of life. And if you're going to penalize people and want them to act like the 1800s, you know, I ran track. That was supposed to be amateur sports. That stuff was never amateur for us. Jesse Owens and them said, hey, I won this gold medal and now you want me to tour Europe free? No, it's all about money and prestige. So,
I am extremely disappointed that Barry and Roger didn't get in. And, you know, I hope now, you know, obviously this was their last year of eligibility on the writers list. They will now move over to eventually decide where a special committee will take a look at them. And I do hope that this committee will look favorably at them the next time that they're up for the possibility of induction.
Because my understanding, I was reading an article last night that even Willie Mays, he tried to talk to the writers about getting.
They had it.
You said, boy, you said that quick.
What's going to happen? It's unfortunate, and it still speaks to, I think, some of the issues that we have in our sport that we still are having to face and deal with. You know, Barry as a kid saw how they treated his father. His father was an amazing baseball player. And a lot of times with African-American athletes, particularly in that environment, that baseball environment. Basketball and NFL, there are so many other Blacks in those sports. But when you are a highly intellectual guy and you don't necessarily do what the establishment wants you to do, now all of a sudden you're looked at as being adversarial.
A problem.
You are uncoachable, you're a problem. And I think that is part of what happened with Barry, because he already had kind of a distrust of the media after seeing how they treated his father. And he's a very bright man, college educated guy. And so he wasn't going to play those nonsensical kinds of games where you ask me a silly question and expect for me to just be so jovial and answer your question, even though it's a stupid question. So if it was a stupid question, he was going to tell you was a stupid question.
I'm straight out because I'm old enough to remember when most pro sports, we weren't involved in none of them. And as we became part of the professional sports ranks and rose, the Tigers, the Berries, the Doug Williams, and all of that. That's where this diversity comes in. And as far as I'm concerned, the establishment still wants USA apple pie and their figures, their statues, their people at the head of the sport. And when like Muhammad Ali came on, and when Blacks couldn't, before Jack Johnson couldn't fight for these titles and things, it's difficult for the majority of the community to give it up. And from my perspective, they find every kind of way, legal, physical, or whatever, to intimidate people of color from getting their due in their sports. And I go across the board with Hidden Figures and a lot of different things. And it's not to say that Mr. Nelson doesn't want to get along with everybody, but there's got to be some truth in what is being purveyed about why certain things that, like Barry Bonds and Roger, why they not in the Hall of Fame? There's really no reason.
We're talking about two of the greatest baseball players of all time. I mean, Roger was dominant. He was dominant, and Barry was dominant. And it's a shame. It's a shame, and I think
that's where this money and all of this stuff comes into play with decisions that should have. Sports really is supposed to transgress all of that. It's supposed to be like the service. We in war, fighting for the country, but I'm fighting for the brother that's right next to me, white, black, Chinese, or whatever. Okay. Exactly. And as athletes, we usually don't have no problems on the field, no matter what field it is. But it's the administrators.
That's it. That's the problem. These are not athletes that are making these decisions. Great athletes appreciate great athletes. We talked about this before we started the show, but these are not athletes. These are people who will sometimes allow their own personal feelings to supersede what their job is. And that's disappointing. I guess maybe it's human nature, maybe perhaps, but it's still disappointing nevertheless.
Well, do you have any closing words for our audience?
No, well, this is such a big year for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. It was, bolstered by Buck O'Neill's in getting enough votes to be inducted in the Hall of Fame. So we're planning 2 Hall of Fame celebrations this year, a KC to Cooperstown caravan, and then a big Hall of Fame celebration that will be held in conjunction with Buck's, would have been his 111th birthday in November, November the 12th. So please put that date on your calendar. The release of these coins, we encourage people to go to the US Mint website and consider buying one of these coins and keep it as a keepsake to pass down from generation to generation. These coins only grow in value. So you can make a contribution to support the museum, but get something very tangible back that will grow in value. And then, of course, the museum will be taking the lead in commemorating and celebrating the 75th anniversary of the breaking of Major League Baseball's color barrier. And as I remind people all the time, Carlos, you cannot tell the story of integration of Major League Baseball without Kansas City and without the Negro Leagues, because this would be the city that would give us Jackie Robinson, who was essentially handpicked from the Kansas City Monarchs to break baseball's 6-decade-long self-imposed color barrier. And so to commemorate that milestone anniversary, we are in the process now of building a brand new exhibition called Barrier Breakers. That will be a traveling exhibition that we are slated to debut it in Los Angeles in April, in time for the annual Jackie Robinson Day celebration. And so we've got a lot of great things going on right now, and we hope to bring back events like the Hot Dog Festival and Jazz and Jackie that we haven't been able to do for the last 2 years because of COVID. So we've got our fingers crossed that we'll be able to bring back those events again. And I won't say business as usual, but business as close to usual as possible.
All right. In closing, the last thing I want to ask you, give me the bubblehead lineup.
You know what? We're working on a brand new one right now to coincide with Buck's induction into the Hall of Fame. So we got something pretty special brewing. We just finished that series that we did with High V. And of course, it concluded with the Bo Jackson bobblehead, which, man, they flew off the shelf. People love Bo. Mm-hmm. Bo is still this.
Bo knows.
Bo knows. And Bo's bobblehead was tremendously successful. So that completed a 5-year series that had Frank White, Willie Wilson, Amos Otis, John Mayberry, and Bo Jackson. And I have to tip my cap to my friends at High V who underwrote this entire program. Man, Carlos, they helped us raise well over $300,000 from this bobblehead promotion that we were doing every year with them. And so now it's back to the drawing board to come up with a new special something that we can hopefully partner with our friends at High V.
I got about 6 minutes, but I need you to answer this in 1 minute. You had the new intern come on board. I forgot what her name was.
Kiana.
Talk about her a little bit.
Kiana, we brought Kiana on last September to be our community engagement manager. And she also handles social media for the museum. And she's done an amazing job for the museum because it has really strengthened us along the areas of social media. I was doing a lot of this from my own kind of social media account, and we were able to roll this off so that the museum had its own account. And we're seeing that aspect of our operations really grow. The alignment, the continued alignment that is being made with other community entities has grown. And she's had the challenge of coming on board, right during the midst of a pandemic. And so we're excited about some of the things that we're working on, our new Young Friends of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum program, because Carlos, we got to get younger. We've got to find
where we're going.
Yeah, we got to find ways to engage more young people in this story and get them to a point where they want to support what is happening at the museum. And so we need to be able to speak directly to them. And so she brings a bevy.
She bridges that gap.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's been really important.
All right. In closing, I'd like to say, when you invest in your community, you're really just investing in yourself.
This program is brought to you by the City of Fountains Coaches Association.